Hi, I'm Dal Basi, a solution consultant here at Eviden. I've been spearheading the development of our ServiceNow application, which is aimed at providing better capability to support organizations in assessing and reaching their NIS2 compliancy. This utilizes ServiceNow as the baseline of the product and tool. Now, this video is ultimately to demonstrate our version 0.5. You'll be seeing some of the capabilities that we have already developed within the platform, but just be aware that there will be better videos and better capability coming up. So this is just a taster of what is to come. But before we jump into a demonstration itself, let's now have a look at what NIS2 is, why it's important, and who it's going to impact. So what is NIS2? Ultimately, NIS2 concerns itself around the cybersecurity measures an organization needs to implement. But what it means for the EU is that for organizations that are providing critical services, it's ensuring that they've considered, they're measuring and are carrying out the appropriate cyber measures to mitigate any risk of a cyber attack, or to ensure that they are resilient if an attack does happen. To ultimately ensure these services aren't knocked down if something does happen. So who is this impacting? So if you look at that central column there, you can see that it's the categorization is essentially broken down into two key sectors. That's the essential and the important, and you can see how it's quite wide ranging because there's many different areas of the European Union that have critical services being supplied to them. And in terms of a timeline, just below you can see that coming up to that deadline of October this year, when organizations and countries themselves are going to have to start to adhere to these new regulations. So time is of the essence to get something in place to support meeting those requirements. And then what are the measures themselves? What are the key subsectional areas or security pillars that organizations need to consider? Well, you've got things like your InfoSec policies and risk analysis from a risk and compliance perspective. Then we're looking at things like your cyber security and incident handling and the vulnerability responses that you might need to consider when you've got these threats that occur. You've got business continuity and disaster recovery. So what plans do we have in place if something negative does happen? Do we have the right stakeholders in place? Are they informed on what activities should happen and when? Third party and fourth party supply chain is now key, and you've got to ensure that not just you but also the organizations that support you are considered when we think about the threat to your services. You've also got things like your cyber hygiene and awareness training, so it's we've got to consider the stakeholders who are key within your organization to ensure that even individuals within the org themselves have the appropriate training so that they can support cyber security on an individual basis. And then finally, things like your asset management, your HR security and access controls, and multi-factor authentication. So it's becoming a much more wide-reaching regulation. So getting this measured and maintained is going to be a challenge. So we've talked a little bit about what it is, the NIS2 regulation, but what is the financial impact to you as a customer if it's not adhered to? Well, we can see here on the screen, depending on the categorization of your organization, essential versus important, there can be rather large implications if it's found that you aren't compliant to the new regulations. So up to, in the worst case, 2% of your global turnover, which, as we can all agree, is a massive impact. So there's a big driving factor as to getting this done and getting this done as soon as possible. So coming into the demonstration itself. Now, the rationale for why we've utilized ServiceNow as a baseline for this platform or tool is because, well, if you're a ServiceNow customer, you've got a lot of the aggregated data sets that are required for you to be able to leverage when we come to your actual compliance management processes. So if you think about from an infrastructure perspective, your CMDB is going to hold a lot of the assets or CIs that you require to be able to manage or maintain. You've got security operations in there, so you may already be managing your cyber incidents or vulnerabilities within the platform. OT management, if operational technology is key, you've got the assets leveraged within the platform. Supply chain from a third-party risk management perspective. Third and fourth party supply chains, again, those data sets here live within the platform, and the same is true of business continuity management. But also key to this is your governance, risk and compliance. So the policies, the controls, the risks, the regulatory documents themselves, they would live within GRC, and they would be managed and maintained from a compliance perspective within those different modules within the platform. But how we're able to then leverage those data sets within our single workspace here and pull that together to start to drive NIS2 specific processes, which are going to be important when we consider this specific regulation. So we've utilized within ServiceNow something called workspaces, and that's basically a tool within ServiceNow where you can pull together all of those different data sources and reports and processes that you actually might need, so that the end user in this case would never have to navigate out to these different tools that might live across your wider enterprise. So in this case, what we're showing on screen is the overview page, the first thing that you'd be greeted by. Now, before we continue, the plan would be to have different views based on the different stakeholders. So a CISO view for your CISO, or a compliance manager view who's actually the active operational person. So those different views would provide different levels or layers of reporting. So the CISO would see guidance, heat maps, maturity scales, next steps type stuff, or a high level view. But for now, we're just showcasing, as this is a version 0.5, the full reporting at this stage, which is going to be developed out. Now at the top here, you can see we've got this process, the stage process flow here at the top, broken down to 5 key stages, and that's something we've built based on one of our key use cases, which we'll go into. I'll show you in a little bit more detail later on, but it's going to be key to start to jumpstart your compliancy based on current frameworks that you may already adhere to. And then below, we've got these different tabs for reporting purposes. One of the key activities we've done is we've taken the 10 different security pillars, shall we say, within the NIS2 regulation, and we've aggregated them into linked activities. So, for example, we've got cybersecurity, people and infrastructure, access from a digital and physical access perspective, supply chain from a third and fourth party supply chain perspective, business continuity management, and then finally an overarching risk and compliance view for all of your data sources. So coming down to the actual overview page and seeing some of these key reports, the first thing you're greeted by is an overarching view of how is your compliancy from stage 1. So this is all of the controls that exist from a NIS2 perspective. What is the compliancy of those controls themselves? And they would highlight whether you need to delve down and view whether some activity needs to be carried out based on that compliance score. You've also got things like your key indicators that will be running based on the data sets that live across your enterprise, and just a high level view of the compliant and non-compliant controls. And then below, what we've also done is we've aggregated all compliance tasks. So that could be things like your compliance issues, remediation tasks that need to be carried out, or activities like your assessments. And then we've also developed a specific lens for NIS2 related tasks. So if we've got, and we'll talk about some of these use cases in a minute or so, specific activities that need to be resolved from a NIS2 perspective, i.e. identification of specific controls or assessments of specific controls which are NIS2 related, as well as assessments. Now this is related to use case 1, which I'll talk about in a minute. Overdue NIS tasks, any tasks which haven't been completed in the set time frame, unassigned tasks, and then you can delve down into any one of these reports by just selecting them, and it will give you a list view of that information. And then on the right hand side here, we've got your active NIS2 notification tasks that are outstanding. So the reporting, statutory reporting required when you do have a cyber threat or event. Do we have any active reports that are still being worked on, any closed reports that I want to view, or any urgent reports where we've only got a couple of hours remaining to really send that out based on the regulatory requirements. And then below, we've also got the actual policy itself. So we've uploaded the NIS2 policy, as well as showing you a changing overall compliance of that policy over time, and then a further compliance breakdown of those controls which sit underneath it. So coming across to the other tabs where we've aggregated other reporting. So you'll start to see a similar format to a lot of these tabs, because what we've done is we've tried to provide a single way of understanding what you're seeing in terms of a data perspective. So coming into the cybersecurity tab, you'll see again that the controls which are relevant to cybersecurity, their compliance scores, the indicators, and the subsequent controls that sit underneath those. But below that, we start to aggregate some of the operational data which is relevant to NIS2. So we start to see the specific security incidents that have come in either into your security operations module within ServiceNow, or uploaded via an external tool through an integration or manual uploads. You start to see your security incidents by state, which are specific to NIS2. So for those which are active against specific services, for countries that live within the European Economic Area. You've got incidents by priority, which are NIS2 related, and then by business impact, but also remediation status. So for those vulnerabilities that haven't been remediated, or by specific age. And then coming across a level again, we've got a similar view as before. So the controls, the indicators, the control objectives. And then we've got this new piece which is around outstanding cyber hygiene training. The related training that would be required to ensure that your end users who also need to ensure that they're adhering to cybersecurity rules, what training do they need to adhere to? This will again feed into the controls that exist within the platform itself. But again, one thing I'll point out here is that this is just a baseline of reporting, and we can add in any specific reports that would be required for any individual customer on top of this. And then below, we've got CMDB data, so the health of your CMDB, the correctness of it, so CI count, orphan count, duplication, and staleness. And then coming across to the Access tab, that same similar view at the top for the controls, objectives, and indicators. But also we start to see your compliancy to the different policies relating to physical and digital access here. So here's your physical access controls policy, the overall compliance and the control status, just relevant to that specific area, and any activities or tasks related to that. And then going across one more time to supply chain, similar view at the top, but now below this, we're going to start to see specific third and fourth party supply chain reporting. So at the top left, we've got information around that. If it's no longer just okay for you to notify the regulator when you've had a cyber threat, but what about when someone in your supply chain has had a cyber threat? Have they reported that to you? And do you want to be able to have visibility on what those reports look like? Do you need to further report that out to your own regulator? So we've got a report here for that. And then here's that notification sent to affected customers. So in the case where you're a third-party supplier to another organization, having that managed in this single space is going to be pretty helpful for you to keep track of ensuring that you've done the appropriate thing when it comes to cyber threats and events. Do we have any ongoing incidents with outstanding notifications to be sent? So again, when that cyber event happens internally within the organization, we need to ensure that there's a notification process along the chain. And then information about vendors themselves, so total vendors, total engagements that are ongoing with those vendors, and then a breakdown of the risk scoring of those different vendors. And then here's a kind of a slightly better view of that same view. So we've got but by the different risk tiers. How many vendors do we have in each section, and do we want to delve down into that level of information? What are our top risks when we're considering those different vendors? And then also, if we're managing this within ServiceNow's third-party risk management tool, do we have any issues that have been raised against those different vendors? We can see that by priority in this single segment. And as I was saying before, the fourth party overview, you get to actually have a look at who those fourth parties are, or even unknown fourth parties that we need more information about. And then specific vendor assessments that you might have sent out to those vendors. Are any outstanding? Are there any issues that have been raised? And then what tasks are remaining to complete? This is all leveraging the capability within the ServiceNow platform. Coming across one more time to the business continuity tab. Again, that similar lens at the top, but here we start to see, do we have any crisis events what state they're in? Do we have any exercises that we're working on, what level they're at, assets by recovery status, and then plans by status and tasks by status. But we could also have additional reports around, where we've got a business process or a service which doesn't have a business continuity plan in place. We can highlight that on this individual page as well. And then finally, just an overarching risk and compliance view where we've got same controls information at the top, but also any active tasks from a compliance perspective that have been worked on from an NIS2 perspective, and a change of compliance over time. But yeah, I'll just reiterate, this is just a baseline, and there'll be some additional reports that we're working on over the next few months. And this is all malleable. So if you as a customer have specific needs for specific reporting, we can absolutely add that to here. But we'll see a little bit more reporting in a little while. I'll come back to that. Now, coming across to our first key use case. As mentioned before, we've got this process workflow at the top of the dashboard. That's a specific workflow that we've built to semi-automate the process to carry out some level of gap analysis, which will identify how prepared your organization is for the upcoming NIS2 regulation. But also, it will leverage those questions to remap your current compliance frameworks to the new NIS2 framework. So for example, just by answering a set of questions, our system will automatically drag across the appropriate controls and activities that you're already carrying out from different frameworks such as ISO, CIS, or the original NIS1 framework. So those will be ones that you're already compliant to. So we can jumpstart your journey to NIS2 compliancy by leveraging activities you're already doing or already have done. Alternatively, if you do not adhere to these frameworks, we will provide you out-of-the-box controls that we've generated and believe would be relevant to specific locations that your organization trades within or operates within. So taking into account the country's national laws, which will be coming out in October. So for example, we'll generate a different control based on how each country is looking to implement NIS2 for that nation. And then we'll link that together automatically in the system just by answering the same subset of questions. So you've got controls against each of the core security domains that you need to adhere to, while taking into account how they need to be implemented quite differently country by country. And then finally, we've got a validation stage where we need to validate the evidence that you'll need to provide, where you already have some compliance in place. And this will make your audits easier and more streamlined. With the final step after the validation is completed, we'll be going on to ongoing and continuous compliancy, where you move into the operational stage of ensuring you're keeping on top of ongoing compliance activities, and we provide that visibility within this single workspace. So let's show you a little bit of the first three stages of this process. So we've built out a proprietary assessment to carry out that level of gap analysis, with the first stage being categorization of your organization. By filling out this assessment, we automatically can categorize your company into it being an important or essential entity, but also the system will identify the level of maturity you'll need for each of the security domains based on the sector and the subsector that you work within, as well as the activities that you carry out across those different areas. So here we've jumped into the company categorization assessment. Now you complete this once and the system will automatically, based on your responses, categorize your organization into important or essential, as well as drive out what level of maturity that you'll need to reach within those individual pillars of NIS2. So, for example, you might need to answer questions around the size of your organization, the sector that you work within, and the subsector, and the activities that you do within those subsectors, as well as which countries you operate within across the European Economic Area. And this will drive out the different country layer assessments where we take into account the national regulations. So we'll have a subsequent questionnaire which will be produced and automatically updated when October rolls around, so that we can take into the factors that affect the different countries when considering NIS2. And then we delve into the different policies and procedures which are relevant for NIS2. For example, does your company have a policy that mandates risk analysis for all deployed information systems and possibly additional measures to reduce the risk of an IT system to an acceptable level? And you would answer yes or no, and then provide additional attachments to this document. Now, I'm not going to waste time filling in the whole of this document for you, but this just shows you what it looks like. So let's jump into the next stage and I can show you what the outcome of something like this would be. Now that we've completed that company categorization assessment, you can see that the process stepper has already moved on to the next stage. Now that there is going to be an intermediary stage for country level assessments, and that will be based on the specific national regulations which are coming out in October for each country within the European Economic Area. What we'll do is, utilizing both the country assessment and gap analysis in conjunction, we will be able to drive out which control objectives you'll need for each of the different security domains, taking into account those national regulations and how each country wants to implement different controls. And this mapping, on automated mapping, will keep up to date and maintained as those regulations change. So moving on to the gap analysis assessment, what happens here, based on those different country assessments, we'll produce a gap analysis assessment for each country. And I'll just jump into that now. Here we can see the gap analysis assessment. Now this assessment is a dynamic assessment, so it will take into account responses you provided in previous sections. So if you'd said in an earlier assessment that you adhere to ISO, CIS or NIS, or no framework at all, this will change to update the questions based on your responses. Because what we're trying to do here is leverage any frameworks you work with to jumpstart your compliancy. Or if you don't, then to provide you a bridge gap by producing a baseline control sets which our experts have designed to support you in implementing NIS2. So in this example, in the company categorization, we've said we work within the country of Austria, and we are also compliant to the ISO 27001 framework. So it's going to ask you a subset of questions related to that. So, for example, do you have a documented policy on risk analysis? We can say yes, and then it might ask you additional questions to delve into the level of compliancy you have within that framework. So, we've got these policies in place, and that will ask you to upload those specific policies. Alternatively, if you already have your frameworks in place within ServiceNow GRC, then you can just select those records and they'll be reviewed they'll need to be reviewed and validated in the next stage. Again, I'm not going to walk you through each of these steps, but let's just jump across and see what happens once we've completed this. So now jumping back into the overview workspace, you can see now we've moved into the validation step. Now, what is the validation step? There's a couple of things here that will have happened automatically by filling in the current assessments. One, and I'll show you this in a second, we're going to provide you a heat map showing your current layer of maturity based on the responses you provided. This will be unvalidated as the evidence needs to be reviewed for what's been provided. But the second thing, and that's related to the evidence review stage, is it's going to generate a bunch of evidence tasks where either one of our cybersecurity consultants, or whether you've got an in-house NIS2 consultant who's an expert or an SME in this area, will need to review the evidence provided to ensure that the policies in place are adherent to the expectations of NIS2. So if I just jump into the assessments tab, we can scroll down to the bottom here, and here I filled in a load of questionnaires, and you can already see that based on the different NIS2 security domains, A through J, and a bunch of countries that we've responded to, you can see that we've got a traffic light system showing the layer of maturity. Now, this takes into account not just the responses to your gap analysis, but also country level and company categorization. If you work in specific subtext sectors or sectors, the maturity layer that you're required to go down will be different based on other industries and sectors, and therefore this map is dynamic to support that visibility. We can see or select onto these to provide additional guidance once we drill down. Now let's jump into reviewing the evidence request tasks that are generated automatically based on those responses. Now, just by answering those assessments, we've generated this evidence review task. So my answer to relating to the policy of ISO 27001 with relation to information security roles and responsibilities has generated this task. And now, ideally, what you would want is you would have a compliance expert internally within your organization, or even an external expert would need to review the documentation provided. So here's the document that was attached to the previous assessment, to look for major factors that are required for NIS2 compliancy. Now, we're building out what those factors would be, but for example, you would need to look at and ensure that the policy itself has been reviewed in the last 12 months to ensure that it's still a relevant policy and up to date, or you would need to look for appropriateness of it to the NIS2 security domains that this is relevant to. So we know based on which questions were asked that this is related to security domains A and B. So that's an example of some of the factors you might want to look for. And what we've done is based on the response provided here, so whether it passes or fails, we've inherently linked that to your heat map. So that's why we're in the validation stage, because we're validating your heat map. So for example, if they were to fail it, and in the previous assessments, the answer had green lit a security domain section, but the reviewer has failed it in this section, the segment within the heat map would then turn red or yellow depending on how if it's partially failed or fully failed, and that would then be a true visibility on where the gaps lie within your organization and where activities need to be focused upon to actually bring yourself to better compliancy. And the final thing to point out is once you've completed that validation step, what the system's going to do is it's going to automatically reassociate any controls within those frameworks based on our proprietary mappings now to the appropriate policies within your NIS2 policies, and that will be within the ServiceNow GRC space. So it'll pick that up automatically. If in the case where you don't have a framework that you already adhere to which can be mapped across, we will provide those automatically. So they'll be generated off the back of your responses immediately. So that was a look at the gap analysis and company categorization process. And you can see on the right hand side there, we've now moved into ongoing continuous compliance, as is expected with any framework. But the other piece that we want to talk about today is the notification process. So there is a new regulatory requirement for NIS2 whereby each organization needs to report out when there's been a cyber threat or incident which has occurred within their organization or down your supply chain. So let's just have a look a little bit at what that means first before we jump into a demonstration. So here's a look at what that new timeline looks like for any cyber threat or incident. So on the left hand side, you can see if your organization has had an incident occur, you've got 24 hours to now report out the kind of a low level of detail around what has occurred within that threat, within that incident, which services have been impacted and how it's impacted the European Economic Area. and then you've got another 2 days to provide a more detailed version of that information. And then finally, a 1-month submission must be submitted for a finalized report, providing full level of detail around everything, that all the activities that have been completed and the impacts that you've seen. Now, before we jump into it, just one thing I'll mention here is that each different country is going to have their own version of how they, level of detail of report they'll require and how they want that reported out. So what we have built within Platform is a way of capturing the same set of data, but automatically reporting that to the different relevant regulators in the fashion or format they require. Now, the reports themselves haven't been produced yet in terms of a template of what each regulator will expect. However, what we've done is we've taken the French regulator ANSI's version and used that as a template. But with the product, we will produce or supply a templated format automatically and keep that up to date as the regulators change that requirement. So let's jump into a demonstration. So if you were to imagine that there has been a cyber threat or incident that's occurred within your organization, and if you've got security operations within ServiceNow, the module, we've got a way of configuring the system to automatically trigger this process by factors that you define. So, for example, if it's a type of incident with a specific impact or risk against it, then we can automatically trigger that, and you can set what those factors are, because we don't want to be reporting everything out. We've had a phishing attack and it's not been successful. I'm not sure we'd need to report that to the regulator. Alternatively, if you don't have security operations, we can integrate into an external tool set and do exactly the same thing. Or finally, if you just want a manual system, then we can do that as well. But going back to the example, let's say that's happened. We've had that threat occur. Now, what the system's going to do is it's going to trigger on one of these records. So I've pre-filled in one just to give you an example of what it looks like. So we've taken the level of detail that you'd expect to be required to fill in from the ANSI NIS1 report, as NIS2's reporting templates haven't been completed for the different regulators. But for example, we can see here that you've got details like who the declarant is, so the main point of contact, who's going to be important to keep in touch with the regulator, or additional points of contact that are required from an ANSI perspective if they need to get more detail, descriptions of the incident, if there's any of that information, it's all captured here, impact of the incident itself, and then handling of the incident. Now, some of this detail we can automatically drag through. Again, in the case of security operations, you'll have an incident response teams there who'll be able to pull information from those reports. Or again, we could set up an integration to an external tool where we know that information's already been captured and drag that in. Now, the key thing here is once you've got to a state where you've completed enough information, what we can do is select this generate report button. And what that's going to do is automatically generate a report based on the information here. And I can just select on this and see here's the report required, and all the detail required in here has been filled in from that information that we've just filled in. Now, additional to this, one thing we'll point out is, as I've mentioned earlier, the national regulator is going to require different levels of reporting based on their national requirements. So what we're going to do is automatically build that into the system. So if you've said that the location of the incident is a specific area or a specific country or multiple countries, then you just selecting or filling in the right information and selecting generate report, those reports will automatically be generated in the fashion they need to be, as well as that different fields will show up depending on what's required based on those selections. And then the final thing to point out is, we can automatically send this out to the appropriate regulators if required, but we can understand that that's probably not what most organizations would like to happen, or if you did like that to happen, you require approval layers in between. So we've built in an approval process in here, which you can define the levels of approval that are required before anything's sent, or even to sign it off. So just an approval for sign off, and then you would manually send that out if required. So you've got that flexibility built into the system as and when you require it. Right, and that's a quick overview of our current NIS2 application. As I said before, there are going to be updates coming out with better capability and functionality within the system, with additional use cases that we'll be looking to implement. If you've got any questions, feel free to reach out, and thanks for listening.